Good morning, everybody. Thank you for making the effort to be here for the Up with the Lark slot. So I'm chairman of the Baltic Air Charter Association. Our role is to raise and maintain standards of conduct in the air charter market. We've got around about 240 corporate members from all over the world. And then, as Alistair was saying, in my day job, I'm also a lawyer, but don't hold that too much against me. Finding new ways to grow the charter market is something of a holy grail to our members, and so I'm really hoping to get some gems this morning to take back to our members and put to practice in the market. There's a great deal going on in the charter market over the past few years, with issues ranging from technology disruptors to technology being disrupted by cybercrime to all sorts of new innovations and, of course, all sorts of political uncertainties in the current market. Fundamentally, for me, brokers, just like lawyers, are problem solvers, and they've been flying customers over difficult borders for many decades. So I'm not too troubled by all of that, but it's always very important that we think about our market in ways that we can improve the way that we do business. And obviously from the Air Charter Association's point of view, this is all about the flying customer and how we can get brokers and operators to work better together to make that work for the flying customers and to improve business relationships throughout the entire chain of contracts. So let me just introduce our panel this morning. Sitting next to me, I'm sure you know all of these people already, but we've got Philippe Fragniere from Exklusiv Aviation Services. Next to him, we've got Phil Brockwell from Centreline, Steffen Fries from MHS Aviation, and on the end, Ed Underwood from Avsurance and Avfuels. Okay, let's jump straight in and ask the first question. So objectively, is air charter actually complicated? And let's start, well, it's easy to start with the first question. I'll start with Philippe, who's nearest to me.
I think it's been, good morning everyone, first. Yesterday we mentioned about the back office, and it's true, as soon as a flight is confirmed, there is a lot of work going on. So the mechanics does not change. People would say complicate. The question is always the time frame. So the quicker you get information, the quicker you can work. Is it really complicated? Is when you go with, I think, a platform, yeah, you need to have the most accurate information at all times, coming from the brokers, going to the operator.
So we're talking about specifically transactional charter as opposed to the complexities of running an operation, which I would say was relatively simple, but made relatively complex by its dynamic of the market.
Yeah. Okay, Steffen?
I agree to Phil. It's the charter itself. I mean, your customer calls the broker, you type it in Avinote, you get 20 offers, you click all 20 of them, you get back hard quotes from the operator, you select the best value for money for your customer, we send out as an operator the contract, you transfer the money. It's simple. I would say we are old-fashioned and it's labor-intense, but it's not complicated. The charter itself, we're not talking about, as you said, the operation with getting slots and parking in Ibiza and all that stuff.
I agree. It's on the surface relatively simple. You book the flight, but it's the back office paperwork and the multiple quotes that really do make it pretty complicated and hard to make money sometimes.
Yes, well, we'll come back to that very point, I suspect, but it's really interesting because I spend quite a lot of time obviously talking to the flying customers themselves, and they never really get it. They always say, oh, it's all terribly simple. I don't understand why they make it so complicated for themselves. But it seems like it's the sort of proverbial swan that's sort of serene on the surface, but paddling away furiously underneath. But I think sometimes it paddles more furiously than it needs to. And I suppose that leads us on to the question, well, what are the factors that complicate the way in which the charter market currently operates? Let's mix it up a bit. Let's start with Steffen.
I think today we see a buyer's market for charter customer. There is overcapacity to what we can see. I mean, if you want a plane tonight from London to Los Angeles, I'm pretty sure that some of the brokers here will find you an aircraft. So due to that fact, people go out for shopping. I mean, looking back 10 years, some of my former NetJets colleagues, our NetJets customer, they didn't shop around because there was no better deal out there. But today there are a lot of good deals out there. So overcapacity leads to shopping. Shopping means it triples or quadruples the workload on the operator side because I get the same request 10 times or 5 times because you easily click all 30 buttons on the first page of Avinote. Another factor, I think, is a lack of education and training on the staff side, on both sides, operator side and broker side. So I would say 9 out of 10 flights we get the request from the broker about the baggage capacity. I mean, it's always the same on a Falcon 2000, most likely. You can't fit 20 suitcases in a Falcon. And no, we don't have 14 beds on a Global Express. And this is what makes it inefficient and labor intense. Again, we get a lot of, I mean, Bernhard Fragniere said yesterday they have about 1,000 emails a day with the ground handlers. We do have about the same with the brokers, and it's. I think there is a lot of room for improvement to make it more efficient. Again, it's not about necessarily the complexity.
Thank you. And Ed?
I think the biggest problem is that, from my perspective, I'm not an operator, but it seems like the contract is signed and all of a sudden that's not the contract. All of a sudden they need all this additional paperwork, and there's multiple people involved in the chain, the broker, an attorney, and all these things add up to a lot of paperwork. And then last minute request, I'm going to Guam, needs a special permit. You have to wake up the president of an insurance company to get it, but you do it. And that's the kind of back office stuff that no one sees that complicates it further.
I was wondering how long it was going to take for the lawyers to get blamed for something. Phil, you're quite interesting. I mean, one of the things I always end up talking to operators in the market, and at the Air Charter Association, one of the things that we've been trying to do is open our market back out, and I know it isn't right for this audience, but to airlines, and airlines have had enough, frankly, of the ad hoc charter market, but the reason they've had enough is because they receive hundreds of emails a day of inquiries for flights they cannot operate, for aircraft they don't have, for routes they're never going to fly, for places they're never going to put their tails on the ground. And they just get fed up with it, and they just end up blocking all emails because they don't have the time to sort the wheat from the chaff. And you were talking about this yesterday, Phil. It's quite interesting to hear your thoughts on it.
So for us, typically in a summer day, we'll receive about 300 Avinode inquiries, for which we'll decline roughly 66%. So 2/3 declined on performance or crew availability, and we'll book 2%. So for 100 quotes, decline 66, book 2. None of those tasks are simple, but the volume presents its own complexity. And there's been an enormous amount of money thrown at the industry to develop platforms and improve workflow, but pretty well only at a B2C level. What we're not seeing is investment at a B2B level to protect the broker-operator relationships, which I think deep down we all know is where the best outcomes come from, rather than trying to miss out the broker and spend however many million of someone else's money. So if we can, as an industry, work together to try and improve our workflow so that, we can monetize. It's terrible. I mean, I feel terribly sorry for the Avinode guys who developed a groundbreaking product sort of 15 years ago, and the willingness of our industry to invest in that and give them enough money for their product to be able to develop much better product, which I think we all sit in the background saying, oh, if I had this and I had probability and I had this, and, we would have much more power to get back in control of our industry rather than being a sausage factory of quotations. So each quote's simple, but the complexity is brought around by the volume.
Philippe, you like to add something?
I think when you search for an aircraft, you are pressurized because they're mostly business flights, not leisure flight. Leisure flight is completely different. You have a time frame. But when you're on business request, it's very, very quick. And the problem we have at the moment is we keep asking people who on the platform show available, but they're not, because no one has updated the information. And again, I think it was very fair comment from Avinode yesterday, and it's on one side the operators to update correctly and the price accuracy, because there is no need to disturb anybody who is not in the price frame that the broker needs. On the broker side, I think there needs to be done more work to fine-tune the request, because that, for all of us, gives us a lot of work for at the end of the day, no result.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it seems like there is some room for improvement on both sides, in a sense, in that we'd like to see better trained brokers. And interesting enough, we get a lot of talk about bedroom brokers and people who sit on their own and trade, and actually some of those brokers are extremely good brokers. actually some of the bad behaviors are often found among big brokers who have proper training programs, but then perhaps don't really implement the way in which they set up their processes well enough to reduce those sort of unnecessary or inappropriate requests. And you hear quite a lot, again, from operators of saying that they don't really understand why even big brokers can't get that right and don't know what the luggage capacity of the aircraft is when they make their inquiries and just fire things off. But I think there are some reasons for that, which I think we'll probably come back to a bit later on. Well, maybe we should start to think about that a bit now. Obviously, you've mentioned Avsurance. We've seen a market in which there's been a lot of what are described as disruptors over the last sort of 5 to 10 years who've come into the market. Actually, when you unpack some of those businesses, they are often just brokers using technology. A lot of the larger brokers are still pretty traditional in the way they do their business. And the question I often ask, and the question until maybe today, I don't know, but maybe not today either, I never get the answer to is, well, has anyone actually cracked the model? Has anyone come up with the most efficient way of dealing with the sort of charter operator nexus? Some people have come close, and there are elements of various businesses that seem to work pretty well. But you have to hope that somewhere out there, these efficiencies will be improved, and we'll come back again to the reasons for that shortly. But let's put that question to the panel, because they know far more about it than I do. I'll start with Phil this time. So, have we cracked disruption of the market?
God, no. I mean, it seems that every time we get a disruptor, it then merges back into the traditional way of doing things. And so we've had a number of platforms that end up having a team of brokers behind, and they've got one section. That being said, the efficiencies of broking, I think, has benefited from that investment. And so we're seeing workflow tools that link in with stuff like Salesforce. So a broker is dealing with 20, 30 inquiries a day to greater or lesser successes, whereas traditionally we're looking at a broker probably dealing with about 6 complex inquiries a day at max. So I think we are seeing that, but the disruption really, it's Avsurance. I think that's the only one that's really had a lasting effect, with probably, Nicholas will tell us, fairly minimal investment, great innovation, whereas now we're not seeing that level because you can't raise money for a B2B product in the broking market. You know, and we should all be protecting that. It's in our interests that the huge marketing costs of client acquisition aren't resting with the operator. You know, that sits with the broker, and the broker does a good job of that. We've got a very successful business that's lasted for many, many decades as an industry between broker and operator. And we just need to start investing in that and protecting it for ourselves, really, rather than looking at the easy option of disrupting, which the default position is miss the broker out. Thank you.
Just before we sort of move along the panel, I'm assuming that's up there as well. Oh, it's just moved. Can we go back to the last one? The problem one got my attention because it's talking about retail banks not having facilities to move large sums of money. And, you know, quite often I get phoned up on a Saturday morning from a broker or operator who's found themselves in a difficult situation where perhaps an operator has decided they're not able to fulfill a flight, and they're trying to book an alternative flight, and they end up borrowing a customer's credit card or someone they know in the States who lets them use their credit card. I mean, this sort of thing has lawyers throwing their hands up in horror, of course. But it's a wider issue, isn't it? There's inefficiency. We use email to communicate. Email is becoming quite an outdated concept, but at the same time, it's also quite an insecure model as well. And you know, we see lots and lots of cybercrime and attempted cybercrime in the market, and people trying to move sensitive people and move large sums of money by email, effectively communications. And this banking issue is a real one. And it seems to me that that's an area where there's potential for a lot more efficiency in the market. It's not so much the people problem. So maybe we could have a sort of think about those issues as we go through. Ed, what's your view on disruption of the market?
I think that the automation it's hitting every industry, but you still need the back office people. So people will send an email that would never have composed a letter or picked up the phone, and because they don't want to waste your time. But email, we'll just blanket people with emails. So the disruption, on the surface, it seems very automated. The clients like it because they can access whatever, but it's hard to get somebody to decipher, is this a legitimate request? Is this urgent? Everything's urgent by email. Even once you've signed the contract, you get urgent emails from all kinds of people, and then you don't know who you're dealing with. So I think the disruptor is the fact that the automation is great, but you're still laboring over the contract. Once you've signed the contract, the original boilerplate thing, no good. You still have to do the work and figure it out. And it's trying to get somebody who actually knows something at the charter broker, even at the company sometimes. And they ask ridiculous questions. So, yes, that's the disruptor, I think, is no back office supporting the automation.
Yeah, so funny enough, there's another example where it's very easy for someone to fire off a simple email with a question in it, and they'll do that without thinking about it, and that's half the problem, I suspect, that maybe if they thought about it a bit more, they might ask a different question or not ask it at all. But when you receive that email and you're being asked to do or think about something, there's probably a whole hinterland of factors you have to take into account. And a lot of the time, the information you need to provide a simple answer isn't there, because they've just fired it off. And so you're left with a choice of either kind of replying with some huge long email setting out all of the possibilities, or trying to pick the one that you think's right, or trying to go back to them and say, well, actually, I need more information, and then you get these kind of ping-pong flows, don't you? So it does make it more difficult. Sorry, Steffen.
I think disruption needs investment, and due to what was discussed yesterday, due to the low margins, we have not really invested from operator and broker side in technology, and because we have not invested, we stay inefficient, and that's a closed loop. And to get out of this, I mean, if let's take Avinode, I agree, Phil, this is has been a disruptor. It brings demand and supply together. But if you type in a request for 2000 local time to fly into Oberpfaffenhofen near Munich, right? It's daylight operation only. That airport should not be even offered. Or Lear 16 to Samedan, it should not be offered. And so why do we have not combined today, APG? So we know the performance of what operators have to do anyway, of a specific aircraft in a specific airport with a number of passengers. We know this today. We know the Boeing wins, we have PPS, so it could be integrated that when you type in a flight into La Mole, you only get offered the aircrafts which are capable of going into La Mole. But who pays for this today? We as an operator have not invested. Oliver King has not invested because he doesn't get paid for this. So I think there needs to be someone going out there and see the opportunity in this data collection and bring it together. There is a way, we just have not done it yet.
So you mentioned Oliver, and in Oliver's defence, I think that Avinode would be very happy to invest if there was a return. I think that we've got to take it on the chin as the operators and the brokers who don't see the value.
This is why I said who pays for it at the end.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I fully agree with that. I think we just need to fine-tune the model, and then we would save a lot of time. And I think Avinode's been a positive. It's been positive change in the industry by all means, that's for sure.
Okay, there was a bit of a kind of poll battle going on. Every time I tried to mention something on the screen, it changes, but there was a bit of a poll battle going on there as to how much money had been invested in technology, and, well, sort of getting towards Brexit-like proportions here, where you might say there's a clear majority or not, but there's been, from the outside, it does seem there has been quite a few attempts and quite a lot of money invested, and IT is a bottomless pit. I think what I'm hearing from the panel is what we need to do is get the model right and then make the technology work for that, and we haven't quite cracked that yet. So I think there's a little bit of further work to do. A lot of the problems for me are driven by margin. As a lawyer, again, and sorry, I refer back to this sometimes, but spend a lot of time dealing with disputes that arise out of tendered contracts. And typically, a tender contract will go out, and 5 or 6 businesses will pitch for that work. And one of those businesses is desperate enough for the work that they will pitch at a very low rate. And that does 2 things. It means, one, if they've chosen, they spend their entire life of the contract trying to make a profit out of it. And in order to do that, they have to find ways to cut corners, cut costs, and do things arguably more efficiently, but actually quite often ending up arguing about a lot of things. But secondly, it then sets that sort of race to the bottom in terms of the of the standards that are being met next time there's a tendered contract and it goes at the same value. And the availability of this information, and some of which is quite unreliable as to how much people are prepared to quote for flying flights, together with the wider issue across the whole of business, which is there's a more for less culture, means that margins have been squeezed. And the effect of the squeeze of the margins is that suddenly there's no slack into that. So we see so many more disputes now about de-icing or small costs, Wi-Fi costs, whatever, in a charter, because suddenly that de-icing cost is probably 2-3 times the level of the margin that the broker's making or the operator's making. Someone's going to have to take a loss on it. And what it's done is to create more friction business friction between the operators and the brokers and the other people in the chain, in a way that is causing people, much more so than they used to pick up their contracts and say, well, actually the contract says this, and then have an argument about it. None of that really helps the business of charter. And we all have to be as efficient as we can. And I understand yesterday there was some discussion about operator efficiency and whether really we got to the point where operators are probably operating as efficiently as they can. But is it time that we sort of admit in the chain that everyone needs to make enough out of it to be incentivized to do things properly? Because part of what you're saying about the brokers is, oh, well, they just fire off all these emails. But you have to remember those brokers are also under extreme pressure these days in order to do their business and maybe not given quite so much thinking time as they would like. It's the same for all of us. Sometimes, let's say you receive that email and the client wants a response within 20 minutes. You have to fire off a response, and then you just kind of sit there thinking, I hope that was the right answer, because I'd like to have spent more time thinking about all of those other things that could have come into play. So is it time that we should just admit people need to start paying more for charter, setting sensible block hour rates and setting a sensible margin for the other players in the chain so that everyone actually does their job properly and probably works more efficiently? Let's start back at this end with Philippe.
Well, I think, the main problem remains the competence. You've got to have people who have expertise. You've got to have people who knows what they're doing, know about the business, know about how to prioritize. And I think that saves a lot of time on every side, on the side of operators when they respond, and on the side of brokers, of course. Now, there are certainly tools to help that to happen.
So I think if you analyse where the price pressure is coming from, we've got a bit of a double whammy. So there are areas of the market that at certain times of the year we have an oversupply in the aircraft or the operator side, but we also have a secondary price pressure felt from the oversupply in the broker market. And that probably for us, we're quite good at saying, no, we're sticking at that price and that's what we need. But we do get an enormous amount of pressure. So I'm not sure that the guy flying in the back is actually driving the race to the bottom. I think it's the oversupply in the broker market. And how we cut that down, I don't know, regulation or licensing or however we're going to make sure that doesn't work. Because we can't carry on like this with brokers losing money. Realistically, the overhead of a broker is relatively low. So when we're looking on Companies House and we can see the figures being released and you've got brokers losing, tens of millions of pounds, that's good. That price pressure's got to come from there. That shouldn't be happening. And, the normal market pressures should be saying, well, that company can't stay in business. But we have got a lot of companies that are lifestyle businesses and outside investment for traction, which I think is proving a difficult long-term business plan.
Steffen?
I think a couple of years ago when it started, to become popular, these one-ways from aircraft owners. An aircraft owner, and it was said yesterday, does not necessarily have an aircraft to recover all his fixed cost. He charters the aircraft or he charters out the return flight from the Caribbean back to Geneva to offset some of his cost. And this, if you today, people assume that you can fly a Dubai to London for $29,000 because it has been offered once. And once this price is in someone's head, you don't get away from these $29,000, and that's a little bit a problem. But it's more a problem for the aircraft owner because his margin to recover his fixed costs, they become smaller. If the operator can't make money with it, and that was also said yesterday, I need a higher management fee if I can't make money on the charter. But at the end, the aircraft owner suffers from these lower rates as well because we can't pay a high lease rate to the owner. He can't offset a lot of his fixed cost. And I think it puts pressure on the whole industry up to the OEMs because some of the aircraft owners, they really consider an acquisition of a new aircraft if they can offset some of it. And I think there are operators out there, and we, for example, we have management contracts where we take the risk on fixed cost. But that means I need to charter out a Falcon at least 500 hours to offset my pilot's cost and my subscription and engine programs, whatever. So I think there are many more factors than just the low price because the customer doesn't want to pay for it. You know, the industry has made that problem ourselves.
Yes, thank you. I mean, there's a talk here about spending in investor funds and working below cost, and you know, I'm not sure the tech disruptors are any people who could have that finger pointed in their direction. And there's always, as I say, there's always someone who wants to build their market share and is prepared to kind of lose money to do so. But as a market, and in the long term, that doesn't work. It can work for a while, and it can work as part of a specific strategy for a specific part of the market, but at some stage the market has to find its balance. And the risk of just letting the market continue to sort of take a devil take the hindmost approach is that it causes actual disruption in the market. And if you look on the operator side, you know, if there's oversupply of aircraft, well, the simple answer to that is you keep attacking each other until there's only enough aircraft left that the market needs, and then you can all make your margin and carry on. But it creates that kind of waved cycle that isn't really that great for the market and not great for the customers.
July.
Sorry?
Until July. So then we all try and make money in July.
Yes.
So we have that one month where there's a
Well,
lack of supply.
you become like airlines where all your cash flow kind of in a big lump, and then towards sort of October time, all the lessors come to me and say they're not paying their bills anymore. What are we going to do about it? Yeah. Okay. Right, well, let's get to the main point then. So what are we going to do about all of this? I'm going to start with one thing that I always get asked about, and that's contracts. And everyone says to me, why can't we just be like the marine market, have standard form contracts, standard charter contracts, this all goes away, it's all done under one set of law, and it's great. And my answer to that is probably about a century or more of attrition in that market that got them to that point. And I think there is a joint exercise going underway at the moment between EBA and BACA to look at contract terms and to at least try and find some common ground in certain areas, whether it be cancellation terms or whatever it might be. You know, and as a lawyer, I always just say, well, look, what you want to make sure you do is mirror those obligations, because you sit there with an operator, broker, customer, then you've got all the other parties that kind of sit out there. And so often those things do not match up. But you know, is there scope for more standardization of contracts in the market? Is there scope for more transparency in the way that we price that would help to reduce some of these inefficiencies? I'll start with Ed.
I think we have to remember you're in a very niche business. Not everyone can charter, so it's by nature of that, it eliminates a lot of problems. So we look to standard contracts with people that don't like standard contracts. So you're dealing with wealthy people and you've got variable costs. So I think it's very difficult. If there was a standard contract like IATA has for the airlines, it would be helpful as a guideline, but you're always going to get the variables, and what we were talking about, the disruptors, there's no one really who's familiar with the variables at some of these places, just people punching buttons. So a standard contract would be a good start, but you're always going to have the de-icing, delayed permit fees, and all those other things. So I guess having a standard contract's kind of an industry thing that gives you credibility, but I think it's still difficult.
But de-icing's really easy, isn't it? You just have a contract that says who is responsible for de-icing costs. And same with positioning flights, but what it requires is more transparency and more accuracy in the contract, doesn't it? And someone needs to make sure the flying customer knows what they are and are not going to be responsible for at the end of the day. Okay, but
in a perfect world, yes.
In a perfect world, yeah. Okay, Steffen?
Yeah, I think the contract is not, I would agree, the standard contract does not solve the issue of inefficiency. I mean, you just mentioned cancellation fees. If I get a cancellation on a home-based aircraft in Vienna and the customer cancels 3 days in advance, it's not really a big issue. But if you cancel a flight on the 27th of March out of St. Vincent, this creates a problem because I sold most likely an empty leg on DOC basis to that airport, and if you cancel 2 days in advance, how should I get the aircraft back? Who recovers the cost? If you cancel 2 days in advance, a Vienna home-based aircraft, no costs have occurred, not even a crew proceeding. So I think on that very small market, and someone mentioned yesterday, we have about 200,000 charter customers around the world. I think a standard does not fit for all purposes, for all aircraft categories, floating bays. Then there are these, what I call emotional aircraft owners that buy an aircraft. They know it costs $1 million a year, right? And if they can set off 200,000, they're happy. And then there are these rational aircraft owners like a Hamburg or VistaJet or partly ourselves, where we have to recover the fixed cost as well. So I think it's a very diversified charter industry.
Doesn't look like we're convincing the audience so far. But let's carry on.
So the charter relationship between brokers and operators is, I think, a really interesting place to start on these, because you send a contract. Our quotes are our contracts, so all the terms are detailed in the quote. We then print it, sign it, scan it, and send it back. Don't get me started on that workflow for the 21st century, but I find that a little bizarre. We've recently, thanks to Oliver and Nicholas, managed to be able to get DocuSign working for us. We beated it with Avernode, and we've, in 8 months, had 2 people, because it costs money to sign DocuSign, so people don't do it. It's just, we are damned as far as by our own actions. However, I think that the issue with the use of standardized contracts is we don't stick to our contracts as an industry right the way across the board. There's an expectation that cancellation terms will be different when you cancel an aircraft than is on the contract. We just don't stick to them. So whether you standardize them or not, that's not going to have the outcome of standardizing the outcome in the event that you have to invoke one of the terms. We've got brokers, some of whom think they're agents, some of whom think they're principals. So it's a really interesting, I mean, the agency law thing, and I'm sure, Richard, you could have a field day on this.
I could do 40 minutes on just that, but I wouldn't.
Yes, yeah. And so I think that standardizing contracts will mean absolutely nothing, because most brokers sign contracts without looking at them and have an expectation of the industry norm. Do we contract to supply an aircraft in the event that this aircraft goes tech? No, but we will. Do other people do that? No. So not everyone will supply you another aircraft. So standardizing the contract won't standardize the service, and I think that's really what we should be heading towards.
Yeah, I mean, I do need to reiterate, and I'm only one person in the market, but I can see a clear trend towards enforcement of contracts from the old days. I mean, I often describe it as they used to be, certainly the broking market in this country used to be dominated by some big characters. And those big characters, when something went wrong, would get on the phone. There's still 1 or 2 of them left. Get on the phone and have a conversation with the CEO at the operator, and it would get sorted out one way or another, depending on who had the stronger bargaining power. It kind of worked. As a lawyer, we used to tear our hair out with all of this, but it worked. But as those people have gone out of the market has become more corporate. The squeezing of margins has forced people to become more corporate, and people are now picking up contracts and enforcing terms in a way that they wouldn't have done 5 years ago. And for, maybe for some businesses that are totally focused on service and want to have good relations between brokers and operators, that's great. But there are other parts of the market that aren't working like that at the moment, and that may be something that will drive change. Sorry, Steffen, you just want to add something to that?
Yeah, I think this, like yesterday, this comes also a lot to know your customer, and Philippe is one of our good customers. I mean, I looked yesterday into the statistics. We do 80% of our charter turnover with 17 brokers around the world. I know these 17 brokers, so I know exactly the pain point from Philippe and his customers. He might have a different contract than Air Charter Service, but it's not the complexity that out of my 6,000 flights, I have 6,000 different contracts. No, I have 17 major contracts with my good customers, and if I know them quite well, I know exactly that about de-icing, I've never to discuss anything with Philippe because he's aware of it, and we trust that he explains this to his customers in a good way. There was never a discussion with any of your customers. So I think know your customer is also for the operator-broker relationship a very important topic. It comes to trust at the end.
Thank you, Philippe.
Thank you. If I may add, I think if there were more people working at brokers, in broker company coming from operations, and if there were more people who worked for an operator, there is one aspect, is the owner approval, yeah? Everybody can say, we see silly emails like, oh, you're 50, we want 40, yeah? Which I don't think is going to get a response anyway. Yeah. So why is it? We all know the DOC, we all know the cost of the aircraft. We know what's reasonable or not. So the owner, in any case, if he does not have the money in the bank, is not going to give the aircraft. So that's a spot market, that's how it works. And secondly, it's true that if you want the owner approval, you have a price you can give. The operator makes an effort sometimes on his own margin, and then the owner will refuse the flight. And in our market, there is a lot of owner aircraft. They're very keen to charter, but they don't want to charter below their cost.
Okay, thank you. So I'm getting some interesting comments coming up. Magic Genie offered you a single wish to improve the charter business. What would it be? Well, let's ask the question.
Pilotless flight.
Yeah. Anyone else want to put something in on that?
I'd like to see that integrated data chain from, as I said.
Yeah. I mean, lots of the comments coming up about technology back and forth. Whether it's a good or a bad thing. I mean, technology is a good thing, obviously. It has to improve the market, but as with all areas of technology, you can spend an awful lot of money that sinks into the sand of an idea that was quite good but not quite there, or solving a problem that doesn't really exist. There is a problem that exists here. There is a technological solution to that problem, I think. And this isn't just about communications. It's about payment flows. We have this kind of back and forth with the Charter Association on the subject of escrow and holding money and when money should be released. And there's a way forward with all of these problems, potentially with smart contracts and sort of slightly different way of communicating, doing business. We have issues, as we say, with the banking system. Those are solvable. You can have payment processes that make that better. But to do that, your starting point really needs to be looking at the whole of the charter market and asking yourself, what is the solution for that market? What's in the best interest of that market? And unfortunately, we haven't quite got there yet. We sort of set each other up in competition with each other. The tech disruptors against the traditional brokers and the brokers against the operators or whatever it might be. From my perspective, what we need to do is just take a step back from that and try and bring everyone together to look at the whole chain and try to work out how we can make that work most efficiently. And that isn't just about cost. It's about service. It's about balancing the need to give yourself the time and space to do things properly against the cost of delivering it. And obviously the starting point for that has to be the customer and not the various participants in that chain. Now, that's somewhat fanciful, I know. But that obviously as a trade association has to be our objective.
I think one of the wish would be a bit less selective hearing from the clients. And sometimes I know they give generally us 20 seconds to explain ourselves, but I think it would help sometimes that they understand they go to the Dorchester, they cannot have a discount when they take a suite, yeah? When they go for every service, every good, every product, they very rarely get discount by people hitting each other for the best price.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on this, answer this question here. Because it's going to change. It's not too bad. Well, we want to pick up is the 0% at the bottom. Because we see vertical integration in the market. We see operators from time to time going out to the market and saying, oh, don't change it now. But going out to the market and say, well, we don't need brokers. We're going to stop using brokers. And then they sort of swing back round after a little while and decide maybe they're going to use some brokers after all. And then the brokers get annoyed because operators are taking their customers. And it just goes round and round in circles. And it was quite nice to see, well, we're still winning, that actually people think, well, some people think there is efficiency. Some people think the margins have reached the bottom. But most people think that it's still better to have brokers and operators working together in the market than to just break it entirely. I'll ask an operator. Steffan's looking at me like he's got something to answer that.
Looking at the headline of our session, I mean, to grow the market, I mean, even if we become more efficient, I think we would not grow significantly the charter market. Maybe on the light jets, what Bernhard mentioned yesterday with Alexa and Hey Siri, book me a Mustang. But looking at our direct customers, and I think it's the same with Philippe's customer, the customer comes 15 minutes late to the aircraft, and he says that was such a seamless experience, you know, it was just great, that we had 100 emails and phone calls with his PA and family office, he doesn't realize. So for the customer, it is easy to book a flight because I would say 100% of our direct customers, the principal himself does not book that flight. So I think even if we need to become more efficient for margin reasons and profit in the industry, but I think we don't grow the market that much.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to finish. Time's up, I'm afraid. I'm going to give myself the last word. It's interesting to me because I've been trying to talk to OEMs about brokers, and a lot of the OEMs took some convincing, but you have to remember that brokers are often putting flying customers on their first business aircraft. And those people need to be enthused by the products. Brokers will develop relationships, human relationships with operators, and often with aircraft types, because they come along to ACE or eBase and go and see an aircraft, and for the first time they've seen it tangibly and understand what it's about, and maybe fall a little bit in love with that particular aircraft, and next time they've got a customer with a choice, they'll make the choice to go for that because that's what they understand. And for me, that is microcosm, is the answer, that if we can build those relationships, build that understanding, then the whole chain will work better for all involved. There is the alternative, as I said earlier, which is everyone just fights with each other and the last man standing wins. And that can work equally well in a different sort of way, but it's not certainly our preferred route. Okay, well, I think we'll stop there, unless anyone violently disagrees with that. No. Okay, well, just remains to say thank you very much to our panel, and thank you to you for attending.
Do we